I just saw a presentation that you gave where in the title you had crypto renaissance. I'm getting the sense that your views on the broader crypto industry are changing, and you mentioned there will be other digital currencies, the tokenization of assets. Can you clarify your views and your forecast on this whole space?
Yes, I think if you had asked me before November 5th what's going to happen, I would say in the event of a blue wave, Bitcoin's going to grind up against resistance and continue to grow, despite a not progressive regime, but it's going to continue to grow because it's unstoppable. And I would have said the digital assets industry is going to continue to shrink and continue to decay in the event of a blue wave. So there was a bifurcation, Bitcoin going up 20 or 30% a year and digital assets falling 20% or 30% a year in the event of a blue wave. In the event of a red wave, I would say Bitcoin is going to blast up, not grind up, but blast up. It's going to power up much faster because now you have a pro-Bitcoin president, a pro-Bitcoin Congress, pro-Bitcoin legislation. We'll have pro-Bitcoin banks. We're going to have pro-Bitcoin institutions. We're going to have pro-Bitcoin mining, etc. So I think that Bitcoin goes from that powering up at 20% to blasting up much faster than that. And I think that the digital assets industry goes from decaying 20% now to blasting up and growing, because the digital assets industry, it can't really prosper in the absence of a digital assets framework, which means three criteria. It needs to be ethically sound. It needs to be economically sound, right? And engineeringly sound, technically sound. It needs to be sound technically, physically sound. So a technical, ethical, economic framework in order to build an entire digital assets industry. So there's no enthusiasm for putting that forward in the previous administration. Now there is enthusiasm, and we'll get one. We've got a promise that we will get a digital assets framework. And I think within that framework, there's clearly a lot of value to be created. If you create digital securities, then what that would mean is you could tokenize a share of Apple stock and you could trade it on a digital exchange on Saturday. And you could even tokenize the Apple stock and you could take self-custody of your Apple shares on your iPhone. And if you can have your photos on an iPhone and your books on your iPhone, and if you can have your files on an iPhone, and if you can have your Bitcoin on an iPhone, why can't you have your Apple stock on an iPhone? So I think that a digital securities framework is very compelling. People want to trade on the weekends. They want to trade on the evenings. They want to, what happens right now? There's like one company that can trade Apple stock. What happens when there's 1,500 companies that can trade Apple stock? What happens when 8 billion people or 6 billion people with smartphones? What happens when people with Android phones can custody Apple stock, right? It's not a complicated idea. Is it technically possible? Sure it is, with modern cryptography. That we solved the problem with Bitcoin, right? And modern cryptography has solved the problem. It's just there's no legal, ethical, technical, agreed upon technical protocol to do it.
Michael Saylor has recently come out to praise a certain Japanese stock for dipping their toes into Bitcoin and ensuring the cryptocurrency to continue on its path of surging glory. With a meteoric rise to 6,650 Japanese yen, Metaplanet has become the talk of the stock market town. The frenzy has attracted attention from influential figures lauding the company for its steadfast Bitcoin approach. Saylor's praises underscore a rally that's seen the stock skyrocket by 81% in just a month. Welcome back to Investocracy Crypto.
So I think digital securities are very powerful, and you could see first billions, then trillions, tens of trillions of dollars of analog securities become tokenized and become digital. And I don't have an ethical problem with it. For example, I wouldn't recommend that you invest in Apple or Amazon or Facebook or Google over Bitcoin. The truth is, I wouldn't recommend Bitcoin over my own stock. I would recommend it over anybody else's stock. It's Bitcoin, right? I mean, so I wouldn't really recommend any of 50,000 public companies, but I would say the world's a better place if they all tokenize, if they're all digital, right? I mean, it's pretty clear if on Sunday afternoon you have the option to buy, sell, trade, or transfer your stock, you're empowered. And that's good for the world. And that's good for the people. I think if you move to, say, digital currencies, I consider a Tether or a Circle, a stable coin, a digital currency. I think that, that a clear regulatory framework where a corporation can issue them, back them by US dollars or US dollar equivalents like short-term treasury bills. I think if you can do that, that's a good thing for the world. If Tether's going to do it, we should have Tether relocate to the United States, give them a license in the US and let them do it. And I also think, though, you ought to let JP Morgan do it and Goldman Sachs do it. And I think you ought to let Circle do it. I think there should be a competition in the market. And if it turns out that Tether and Circle are better than JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs, then I think Tether and Circle should issue all the digital currency in the world. If you're the United States, you just want, you don't want $150 billion of currency. You want $15 trillion worth of US digital currency to be circulating. So I think that that's good for the world, good for the dollar, right? Because you said, well, how does Bitcoin deal with 150 other currencies? Or maybe there's 120. Well, the dirty secret is they're all pegged to the dollar, except for the failing ones. There's only two types of currencies in the world. Well, there's three types of currencies in the world, Natalie, if you break it all down. There's currencies that are explicitly pegged to the dollar, right? Mm-hmm. The DRAM, explicitly pegged to the dollar. The CNY, explicitly pegged to the dollar, right? There's a lot of those currencies where they literally, so China, they keep it exactly pegged to the dollar. It's just the US dollar. Then there's another set of currencies that quote unquote float, and they do this, yep, plus or minus 5%. Yep. They're nominally pegged to the dollar, right? The Swiss franc, the euro, all of these, they're not really floating. They're just enough of a floating to make it interesting. But as soon as they get too strong or too weak, the monetary authorities move to bring them back into parity with the dollar. Nobody really wants them to move. So they're on the dollar standard as well.
Metaplanet has undoubtedly shaken the foundations of the Japanese stock market, catching the eye of heavyweights like Michael Saylor. The firm, under the leadership of CEO Simon Jarovich, has executed a Bitcoin-centric strategy that has captivated investors globally. The stock's upward trajectory from under 1,000 yen in October 2024 to its current zenith at 6,650 yen reflects a remarkable journey, akin to scaling Mount Everest with the speed of a rocket.
It's not competing with the dollar. What's going to happen is, if the U.S. licenses digital currency and we go from 150 billion in stablecoin to 1.5 trillion to 15 trillion, it just means there's going to be a demand for $15 trillion of U.S. sovereign debt that's going to be bought by the digital currency companies, which is why, of course, you would just put them in the U.S., have them audited by, if we dropped the war on crypto, auditors would audit the stablecoin companies. They could do business with the banks. They could relocate to the U.S. They would buy up $10 trillion worth of U.S. sovereign debt, and they would compete with U.S. banks, and may the better company win. And the winners would be the American people, the world, right? Market economics and the future, right? You know, that's the winner. Who's the losers, Natalie? The loser would be every crappy, weak currency in the world, every mismanaged, every regime that's managed less efficiently than the United States. You know, and I know we're oftentimes critical at home, but the truth of the matter is everywhere else is worse. Yeah. I mean, Sri Lanka is worse. China is worse. Russia is worse. Everywhere in South America, it's worse. Venezuela, you think Cuba, North Korea, Venezuela, Lebanon, war zones, Afghanistan, tell me the country in Africa which has managed better than the US. Name the one. I give you the entire continent, right? It's kind of difficult to find even one country on earth. You're like, oh, I think the Singaporeans do a good job. Okay, you might find a city-state, one little city that sort of on some dimension is doing as well or better. But for the most part, there's 8 billion people on the planet, and there's 7.7 billion people that live in a place which is that's managed much less intelligently than the United States. So the losers are the authoritarians and the authorities that wish to impose a fiat currency on the 7.7 billion people that is more inflationary than the dollar. And while they're doing it, they will impose a fiat capital asset on the same 7 billion people.
With a trading volume reportedly hitting 42.6 billion yen, Metaplanet has become Japan's 19th most liquid stock, marking its footprint on the financial landscape. Not even the mighty JP Morgan could have anticipated this as they face repercussions from their short positions. The strategic issuance of a 4 billion yen bond with a 0% interest rate positions Metaplanet for immediate Bitcoin acquisition, showing a level of savvy financial maneuvering. But before going any further, if you made it this far into the video, thank you. These videos take a lot of effort and time to make, so if you enjoyed them, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. This goes a long way in helping us grow. That said, back to the video.
If you were an operating business in Argentina for the past 20 years, and you had 100 million pesos, if you had been able to swap it for $100 million on a digital currency network, you would still be rich. And if you had been stuck in the peso, you would have been devalued 1,000 to 1, and you would be impoverished. And if you had bought Bitcoin, well, yeah, you would be like the richest person in the world, right? I mean, if you had bought $100 million of Bitcoin 20 years ago, I mean, you couldn't, but 10 years ago, yeah, you would be richer than Elon Musk. But the point is, and this is what I learned in my life, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And the message of the crypto renaissance to the Bitcoiners would be, yeah, Bitcoin is like a perfect solution. But the Argentinians didn't need the perfect solution. If they'd all picked the perfect solution, they'd be richer than Elon Musk and Bernard Arnault and Jeff Bezos right now. They didn't need that. They just needed a solution that was better than an awful one. And so in this particular case, a digital currency that spreads to the entire world, that's embraced by the world, would actually provide American prosperity to people in Africa, Asia, South America, ASEAN, Europe, and it would be I'm going to call it a gateway drug, right, to Bitcoin, right? I think that when you're in Nigeria, going to Tether, going to a digital currency that's backed by the US dollar is the obvious step. And after you get there, the next step would be go to digital capital, which is Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin it's not really competing with the currencies. The US dollar is going to actually replace the weak, defective, toxic currencies. People think, well, the US bonds, they're being attacked by Bitcoin. Well, let me turn it around. If we release digital currency, the digital currency is going to go to everywhere in the world, and US bonds are going to capitalize all those other countries. And I wouldn't choose US bonds to capitalize MicroStrategy, but if you were operating a business in Afghanistan or Lebanon or Argentina or Nigeria and you capitalize on US bonds, you would be rich. And so don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think digital currency is going to spread American values and spread Bitcoin values, eventually. And it's a good thing, and it ought to be headquartered in America. And so that's number two. I got digital securities, digital currency.
Metaplanet's meteoric rise presents a compelling tableau that investors would do well not to overlook. Its strategic brilliance, backed by careful financial planning, heralds a promising future for Bitcoin as a whole. But what do you think? Share your thoughts. And finally, if you would like to know more about cryptocurrencies or specifically Bitcoin, go ahead and click on the next video on your screen. See you there.